Sports Radio 92.9 The Game, 92.9thegame.com. We are College Football Overtime. Garrett, Chapman, my friend Abe Gordon. 1 week is in the books. Yes, I know we got Clemson and Duke coming up on Monday night, but Florida State just dominated LSU, and that just capped off, for me at least, an incredible first week of college football. Abe, how you doing, man?
Yeah, there was a lot of storylines you expected, but also some you maybe didn't expect. And so we've come away with, just a couple days ago, we were trying to set the scene for the start of the season. That's all blown up now. I got so many. I'm changing everything that I said on Saturday morning during college football game time at 8 a.m. until noon. So, it was an incredible start to the season. And now you're just left with all of these questions because you only have one game, one small sample size, and you still really don't know what's true, but you're starting to lean certain ways. I mean, what a fun start to the season, man. I loved it.
It's the best. College football is absolutely back. I don't know what storyline I'm going to be leaning into next, but I do know that we have a lot to get into here in the week one podcast. Where we're going to actually react to everything. And we're going to be doing this every single Monday morning. So wake up with us, get us pound that subscription button, and wake up with us every single Monday morning as we get you some water cooler talking points, just so you can go through with the buddies and make yourself look a little smarter, you know? So let's get in here and let's react to some of these games. And I do want to start with what we just saw on Sunday night as Florida State dominates LSU 45-24. LSU looked a little sloppy in this one, in that second half especially. What do you think, Abe?
Yeah, it was weird because we started the game out and everyone's like, these two teams are juggernauts. This could be a semifinal. And then it got very sloppy on both sides. I mean, Jordan Travis made a ton of mistakes that LSU didn't really punish him for. And LSU obviously missing a couple players on offense and on defense, and it showed. They got worn down, and FSU had a real statement there in the second half. That was very impressive. You're looking – I don't even know which offensive takeaway to go against. I know you had singled out Jared Verse on Saturday morning pregame, and, boy, did he show up in a big way. Yeah. But on offense, we talked about Ohio State and the receivers they had with Marvin Harrison and Emeka Egbuka. I'm not sure Jaheim Bell and Keon Coleman are taking too big of a back seat. They were outstanding tonight. 5 touchdowns between the two of them. And Jordan Travis, again, bumpy start really in that second quarter. But whatever went through his brain at halftime, he looked like a different quarterback in that second half. And for all the doubters, myself included, who needed to see it out there, who needed to see Jordan Travis be that guy to have Clemson and Florida State in that same discussion, I saw that in the second half. Now, he's got to carry it over what we saw. But I'll be honest, 3 weeks from now when Florida State visits Clemson, I have a different opinion of how that game may play out than I did just a couple days ago.
Yeah, absolutely. This looked like a playoff team. I know we're only 1 week in, but that looked like a team that can run. This isn't a team that needed a blocked extra point to win this football game. They were the better team pretty much throughout the entire course of this game, especially in that second half. You talked about the 31 unanswered points before that 75-yard. Yeah. I kind of want to call it a trash time touchdown because the game was effectively out of reach at that point. So they scored 31 unanswered points in that second half en route to just a rout, really. And you mentioned Keon Coleman. Yeah, that dude just played himself onto an NFL roster, and I'm saying a first-round pick. This dude is the real deal. He's got size. He's got that length that he flashed on some of those end zone catches. Nine catches, 122 yards.
Yeah, he's a problem. He was guarded. He was covered on some of those touchdowns.
Yeah.
Look, the poor LSU DB at 5'11", which isn't like the tiniest DB in the college game, but he just couldn't handle the size. No. It was almost funny to watch. I felt bad for him, but there was nothing he could do. That's the sort of game Keon Coleman was having. He was unstoppable.
Yeah, and honestly, in a game where Florida State really badly lost the penalty battle, I thought that LSU would have been able to capitalize on some of that. But credit to Mike Norvell. Whatever he said in that locker room, I got to get some of that with my afternoon coffee because that team woke up. And Jordan Travis just had a show of masterclass, 342 yards, 4 touchdowns. he finishes with on the day. Dude played himself into the Heisman Trophy conversation, at least after 1 week, but it gets no easier because they're coming into they have to go up to Clemson in 2 or 3 weeks to end the month. Do you have a different feeling on them? Do you think that have they played themselves to the top of the ACC in your mind right now, looking ahead to that game against Clemson?
I think it's a fair question to ask, but since I have not seen Clemson yet, I really don't know because the one thing I'm waiting to see from Clemson is just how swarming and how overpowering that defense is. But I do think it's a discussion, and I do think that's a game now. Whereas I had doubts about Jordan Travis, I had doubts about the weapons that Florida State had, and I don't think I have those doubts anymore. I mean, if they're going to be able to protect Jordan Travis, they're going to get those frisbee catching dogs open downfield. And that was the biggest key, the biggest difference in this game. Jaden Daniels wasn't bad, but down the field, with the exception of, like you said, that last one that went for 75 yards, there was nothing going on for LSU. And that was not the case for Florida State. So, it has changed my opinions on where things stand in the ACC. And again, it's a 1-game sample size. So it's so difficult and we'll get into this when we talk about Coach Prime in just a minute and why we don't want to overreact to one thing that we saw in week 1. So I'm trying not to overreact to what I saw from Florida State. Honestly, with the respect I have for LSU and how good I think they still are, it's tough not to overreact because that was an incredibly impressive performance on a neutral field in a game that I came in thinking they were going to lose.
Wasn't much of a neutral field. It didn't feel like that. It was all Florida State in that end zone. Well, those stands.
Sure.
On the inverse, LSU, did they show you something that you weren't expecting? I know you don't have Mason Smith, and obviously that's going to hurt you a lot. But Jaden Daniels on the offensive side was running for his life for a lot of this game. He had a couple miscues, had some bad throws, and then there were some drops too that really cost him. They went 0-3 on 4th down, especially in too early in the game where, I don't know, you might just need to take the points in a game like this. What do you think about LSU? Do you still think that they have everything in front of them? Because of course this is a non-conference game and they can still win out and still have a pretty good season.
It's going to be tough. It's going to be tough. My biggest concern with Jaden Daniels is, can he beat you with his arm? And I'm not convinced that he showed me that against Florida State, drops or not. And you're right. For me, when you look at LSU's schedule and who they have, obviously the Alabamas, the A&Ms, the Auburns, cross-division game with Florida, which shouldn't be a problem, but you never know. I find it very tough. And then even hypothetically to an SEC championship, if that's where it plays itself out, I find it very tough for LSU not to have at least 2 losses this season. And I don't know, maybe that loss is in an SEC title game. Maybe they're still somehow in that discussion. I might say without a shocking win, if the SEC, that LSU is out of the playoff discussion.
Wow.
Yeah.
I may not join you on that boat until we see another loss. But
it's just such a bad loss. If this had been, like you said, a field goal loss or something like that, they were thoroughly outplayed, and that's gonna sit poorly with me for a long time this season until they prove otherwise.
Yeah, and one person who I was a little disappointed in was Harold Perkins. He's likely the best player on the best defensive player in college football this year, and he was nowhere to be found. And I think when Mason Smith does make his return to LSU, Harold Perkins is going to be one of the biggest benefactors of that because they can't just turn all of their focus to him. But let's move on to another team that scored 45 points and was pretty wild in the process. The Buffaloes of Colorado beat TCU 45-42. And let me tell you what, they already matched their win total from 2022. 30, they had 7 losses of 30 or more points, but then in comes Deion Sanders riding on Ralphie and his 86 or 87 new players in tow. What'd you learn from Colorado?
Oh, boy. It was interesting. I'll tell you what I learned because I knew Travis Hunter was a beast. And as much as people want to talk about what he did offensively, the interception he had at the goal line is an NFL quality reaction. The speed, the hips, the hands, That's an NFL level interception that I don't think a lot of players in the college game are able to make. And so, but we knew he was good. I'll tell you what, though, Shedeur Sanders can straight up spin it. And for we've got a lot of great quarterbacks who throw a pretty ball, right? Drake May's out there throwing for however many touchdowns, and you've got 500 yards or 450 yards from Michael Penix. There's a lot of guys that throw an NFL quality ball. I look to me like Shedeur Sanders belongs in that discussion. He was outstanding, and if we're being honest, the completion percentage probably should have been higher. I think he actually threw a couple that were straight drops, not overthrows or misthrows. I think that was probably my biggest takeaway is his ability to compete at the highest level. And then on the flip side, are we sure TCU should have been ranked 17th? And I know we don't just, and I'm trying to discredit Colorado's win because a lot of people want to have it like one way or the other. It could be a little bit of both, but they did. Yeah. They lost an insane amount of talent from a team that made a run to the championship game unexpectedly and realistically probably overachieved multiple games last year. So, again, this is that you don't want to overreact too crazily to week one because this could be a TCU team, and I'm not saying they will, but potentially maybe they take such a big step back that they're like 8-4 and 7-5, and Colorado, this win may look different, by week 7, by week 8. But you have to come away impressed, and this is the one thing I will say about Deion Sanders and how he's going about his role as head coach at Colorado. And this is what impressed me the most about their win. A lot of transfers, a lot of new guys, a lot of dudes playing for the first time in a role or situation, playbook, whatever it was that they have not used before. And he had his guys ready to play. Yeah. They were ready to compete, and you cannot take away that aspect of it. I know the post-game comments have raised some eyes. Don't let that distract from what he and his kids put out on that field. That was a team that was ready to go. And that was the biggest question about Deion Sanders going into this game is coming from Jackson, where he had better talent than everyone else because who doesn't want to play for Deion? I know I would. Now you're going to a more level playing field. And can you coach? Can you have your guys ready? How do you handle situations? He answered a ton of those questions right off the bat. That was super, super impressive. And I think it's onward and upwards for Colorado with what realistically is another winnable game at Nebraska, at home against Nebraska. It's a home game. Yeah. That's a winnable game. And so, whatever you say about the personality, the coach, Deion Sanders, proved a lot of things on Saturday.
Yeah, he absolutely did. And look, for somebody who he just got out of the boot, he was that was the biggest thing on the sideline. So he was occasionally taking a seat over there in a chair. But you know what? He looked great as a head coach. His guys played great. And honestly, if it wasn't for the fact that Travis Hunter was out there playing like Shohei Ohtani, Shedeur Sanders would have been the story of the day. He was the first D1 player with 100 yards receiving and an interception in 20 years. I think Champ Bailey might have done that at Georgia back in the mid-90s or something. But look, for all the comparisons to a Shohei Ohtani, his team actually won the game in which he did something historic, So Colorado was able to get it all done and put it all together. And credit to Deion Sanders for that because his son, Shedeur, 510 passing yards, 4 touchdowns. If this was like Jalen Milroe or something like that at a bigger program, we'd be talking about them being the number one player for the Heisman Trophy right now. But it's Travis Hunter's show right now. That's all it really is. That's what it comes down to for Colorado because, look, he played his way into being considered one of the best players in the country. And he established himself and showed the rest of the country why he was the number 1 overall player 2 years ago in the prep recruiting class. The kid's out of this world. The product of Collins Hill.
Let me ask you something about that while we're on the Travis Hunter situation. Do you feel that's sustainable for the whole season? Because
we'll see.
At some point there might be just a physical toll that affects how he performs later in the season.
We have seen this sort of thing before. It's not common, and it's not common for a reason. Like I mentioned, Champ Bailey did this when he was in Athens back in the 90s, but that was out of necessity. Those Georgia teams they needed a little bit more help. And maybe that's how Colorado is too, because look, they do need a little bit of help, and having a superstar like Travis Hunter really does help, but it does take a toll. He had 129 snaps, and that's a lot of football to play. And I understand it's week 1. So you're completely fresh.
It's fresh. Yeah.
So we'll see what he can do, because his out of conference games that Colorado has on the schedule, there is no day off.
Yeah.
No week off, because you go from TCU straight into Nebraska, like you mentioned. And look, Nebraska may not be a world beater, but it's still a Power 5 program. And Matt Rule is going to have those guys ready to go in this game. And I know that the Nebraska faithful are going to want to travel.
And they're on a couple extra days rest, which again, week 1 maybe doesn't matter as much as it would later.
It always matters. No, it'll always matter at least a little bit. Yeah.
Just a quick follow up then on Hunter. If he's going to take plays off, would you want that plays off of his defensive duties or plays off of being a wide receiver?
Look, you have 4 Colorado wide receivers who go off for 100 yards. It makes me feel a little bit more comfortable with him taking plays off on offense. And you got that running back who's 5'9", but doesn't play like it. I think
I'm a little bit more comfortable
with him missing plays on offense than I am on defense.
I think he needs to be in there on defense. I agree.
Just because we saw that interception that he had was an NFL quality interception. It was an unbelievable play from Travis Hunter. And it's a play that I would say there are not a lot of players in the NFL who can make a play like that with that level of athleticism and explosion. But Abe, I do want to transfer over to what we mentioned, the comments from Deion Sanders after the game. I'm not going to set it up too much. I just want to play it, and then we're going to react to it, and I'll go to you first, okay?
You believe that? Of all the hold on. Oh, no. Do you believe that? Huh?
Who said I didn't believe before?
No. I read through that bull junk you wrote down. I read through that. I sifted through all
What did I write?
Yeah.
What did I write?
Oh, no.
Can I ask my question?
Do you believe?
In what?
You don't believe.
I do believe.
You just answered it. You don't believe. Next question.
So that's Deion Sanders reacting to a reporter after the game. Abe, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's really disappointing and frustrating. And I know a lot of people are just going to slide it off the table and say that's Deion being Deion or whatever. It's a bully mentality, if we're being honest. And I think it's childish. And first off, on Deion's behalf, I think it unfortunately took away from what we talked about a moment ago. And that's the heck of a job he did coaching the game. And this became this story, which might be something we have to deal with all year long. And look, like I said, you don't want to overreact to one game, but the idea that he refuses questions because someone is critical.
Yeah.
Specifically the idea that he's pressuring whomever that journalist was to either admit that he was wrong or say that your team is whatever he wanted. I don't know what Deion was specifically trying to get out of him because I don't know what the original writings were and how critical they were, stuff like that. But it felt like a bully mentality trying to pressure him into doing something he didn't feel he should have to do. So I disagreed with how it was handled, and a lot had come out on social media since then about the media or journalists, columnists. They don't have to be fans of the program. They should have the freedom to be critical, and they should. And the short-term effect is negligible. I think the long-term effect, though, Deion could be making enemies in the media he doesn't need to make. It's just unnecessary. And you always want the media not to do you a favor, but if there's a doubt, if there's a chance for them to be on your side, you would want them to be on your side. And it feels like he's not going to allow that to happen for anyone who was critical early on. I think it's the wrong way to handle that. Now, look, Deion is Deion. He's a legend from multiple aspects, right? Pro Football Hall of Fame, Major League. I mean, we all know. I don't need to run down his resume. And he's done it by being Deion, right? He's always done it his way. So I'm not asking him to not be Deion, not be prime, but find maybe a little bit of middle ground to have I don't even think it was disrespectful necessarily. I don't think it was disrespectful. I think he was just using the power he felt in that moment to belittle someone else. And more unnecessary than disrespectful. And I'm sure there's middle ground to get his point across about, because I think it's a fair comment. Not a lot of y'all thought we were going to win. You can count me in that group, by the way. And that's fair. And I'm wrong about that. But I think there's a way to say that a little bit more gracefully, a little bit more respectfully. I wish maybe he had. But at this point, it's over with. He said it. Let's not let the whole season play out with him shredding dudes in press conferences, because at some point, the players are the one who lose out, because they deserve shine for what they did on the field, and he stole the shine from what he did in the press conference room.
It did, and I was very disappointed with the comments just in general, because I think you said it well. It kind of came off as him being a bully, and I like Deion Sanders. I like what he's doing at the program. At the end of the day, it's like he's injected life. The moment he was hired, they all of a sudden received tens of millions of dollars in funding, like just from donors and everybody else. So, and that's because, like you said, Deion is unapologetically Deion. And that's just who he is. And that's who he's always going to be. And I've appreciated that about him. But at the same time, you have an opportunity to bring people to your side. Right. That's what you have an opportunity to do there. Instead, he used it as an opportunity to throw rocks. And that I wasn't very happy with. I wasn't pleased with it just in general, because, look, it's a shame that we had to divert away from the fantastic performances of Travis Hunter and Shedeur Sanders, and all of these guys on this Colorado team, to talk about Deion Sanders again, because Deion Sanders wants to be the story. We're about to move into talking about Georgia and what they did, but we don't talk about what Kirby Smart said after the game. We talk about the performances on the field. Like we still have, we're still going to talk about Drake May and UNC, what they had to do, but we're not talking about Mac Brown. Like, at the end of the day, Deion Sanders is who he is, and he's never going to change, and I appreciate that about him. But come on, you can't throw rocks at somebody, and you can't be a bully.
Yeah, and the other thing is, I think people were going to give him his flowers for the job they did.
Yeah.
I think people were going to come out with, and look, maybe they were going to be a little more patient. Again, we're not going to overreact to week one. But, like I said, the job he did on the field was incredibly respectable. Yeah. He for the people, and myself included, who wanted to know, can he coach? Yeah, he can coach. Like, he proved that in one game. He can coach. He can have his kids ready. He knows what it takes to win. All of that stuff. Like, it's no longer a question for me. So let's move past this and begin to respect, again, what his players are doing, but also what he's doing with a coaching hat, not with a press conference, not with the sunglasses on being prime, but let's show him the flowers he deserves for the job he did coaching. And I think that was going to come, and then he kind of didn't allow it, didn't give it time to let that story breathe. He kind of took it at it in a different direction. I'm with you. Very disappointing. And I just hope we don't get 11 weeks of this, because I really do want to root for Deion, and do want to root for Colorado, and do want to root for those players. And I want to see him prove that, like, for all the doubters, that he is that dude who can coach at a high level. This just kind of stole that story, unfortunately.
Well, the best way to prove it is by doing it on the scoreboard, and they'll have another opportunity when Nebraska comes to Colorado. All right, let's move on to the Georgia Bulldogs, the defending national champions, the back-to-back national champions at that. They handled their business. They win 48-7 against UT Martin, but the Dogs have plenty of room for improvement. One thing I did like from this one is they made the obvious decision to get the ball to Brock Bowers, and get the ball to Brock Bowers as many times as possible and as many phases of the offense as possible. He ran for a touchdown early in this game. Abe, what were your takeaways from this one?
Well, again, it is week one, and let's not overreact. We've seen a number of quarterbacks start slow in their QB1 debut, and I think we saw that from Carson Beck. And I know people are going to immediately ask, did we start the right quarterback? Should we reopen the the quarterback battle, and I think we need to slow that down a little bit.
Yeah.
I think if anything, Kirby Smart, again, we just talked about Deion proving he can coach. I think Kirby Smart has proven he's got a handle on the quarterback situation at Georgia. But I also want to point to some aspects that, everyone's focusing on Carson Beck. Where were the receivers, like, just running wide open? Like this was UT Martin. You should have had wide open dudes all throughout the game, and I didn't see that. So I think it's more than just Carson Beck wasn't as good as Stetson Bennett, stuff like that. I expected this to be a little bit easier. It took them a while, like you said. They finally got into the flow of things, especially as you got into the late second quarter and into the second half. But it's weird to win by 41 points and kind of feel a little bit of a disappointment, a little bit of a letdown. I'm just going to chalk it up to a slow start and not like make too big of a deal out of it, because I know people want to panic that it was like, how is it only 7-0 in the first quarter? Like, what's going on? I'm going to give it time. I'm going to let it breathe. If we have to have this discussion against an SEC opponent, we can. But at the end of the day, it was a comfortable win. You did some good things. Your defense, and first off, was outstanding until they really didn't have to be outstanding anymore. And then you made some depth changes, and UT Martin did get on the board. But, I'm just not going to overreact to it. It was a win. You got some guys their first run in a Bulldog uniform at home. And the other thing is the fact that it didn't go perfect. Probably have stuff to work on, stuff to build on. That actually may be more of a benefit than if it was, what did Oregon score? 81 points or whatever?
81 points, yeah.
It's maybe works out better this way, that you have a couple things you can pinpoint that you've really got to dial down on.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned a good point. Rara Thomas and Dominique Lovett were two guys who I was looking at specifically, and these guys finished with 4 total catches between the two of them. And I mean, for all of the hype that those two are receiving coming into the season, I was hoping to see a little bit more of that, especially in a game where Marcus Rosemy-Jack Saint and Lad McConkey missed. I was a little disappointed in what we saw from that. Dejan Edwards, of course, also missed this game, and Kendall Milton looked pretty good. Really, it was just a running back by committee. We talked to Brandon Adams on College Football Game Time on Saturday morning, and pretty much what happened is what we expected from that running back room. But Carson Beck is obviously the biggest story of the day. He looked shaky, I would say, at times. It was his first career start in college football. So it's like, I can live with that. And honestly, at the end of the day, it's like, as much as these guys want to talk about how it's like, oh, we're not focusing on the 3P, blah, blah, blah. Come on. You're a 19, 20-year-old kid. Absolutely. You hear that noise. Every time you walk around Athens, people say, hey, we're going to go get that 3P. Let's go do this. There is pressure. There is a massive amount of pressure on the Georgia football program. And I understand they have tons of talent, but they looked a little sloppy. And look, when you can do that when you're playing a UT Martin. You can afford to have 59 yards in the first quarter against UT Martin. You will not be able to be afforded that ability against even a South Carolina coming into town in 2 weeks, against a Kentucky who comes in soon after that, against Ole Miss or Tennessee. You're not going to be able to start slow like that. But granted, this defense showed that they are the best defense in the country, or at least will be right up there again as one of the best defenses in the country. And ironically, UT Martin, the Skyhawks, they have the ability to say something that Clemson or Oregon can't. They scored a touchdown against Georgia week 1. I know it happened in trash time, but it still happened. But Mike Bobo and company on that offensive side of the football, they have some stuff that they need to work on. But granted, they played UT Martin. They wanted to keep things pretty vanilla. And now I think they have Ball State coming to town. So not a whole lot more of excitement coming to Athens here in the near future. Of course, they were robbed of that game against Oklahoma because they're joining the SEC. And that would have been who we were seeing them play in week 2. So I'm a little bummed about that one. But at the end of the day, they took care of business and they dominated this one. Let's move on to North Carolina, because I know you and I disagreed on this one when we made our picks on Saturday.
Who's full goal? What's fool's gold now there?
Because one was fool's gold and the other one wasn't. And I think we all know who is fool's gold after week 1. or at least based off of their performances in that first week. South Carolina just gets blown off of the football in this one. And I think it is as much to do with the fact that the offensive line just looked completely out of sorts as it did that North Carolina in year 2 of this Gene Chizik defense showed up ready to play. 30 points per game last year allowed, 436 yards allowed per game. That was 116th in college football. Only 15 teams had a worse defense in terms of yards allowed per game than North Carolina did that last year. And look, that's why I picked South Carolina. It's because I thought that this defense was again going to take a back seat to its offense and Drake May and all of the excitement that Mac Brown brings to the offensive side of the football. But I was completely wrong. They had 17 sacks last year. They had 9.
Yeah.
9 against South Carolina. The Gamecocks never gave themselves a chance. If you have 9 sacks and only given up 9 sacks and only have 11 rushing yards, you're not going to win that football game.
Yeah, that was a disaster that I did not see coming. I thought North Carolina would win. I thought they'd be able to score enough. I did not see the South Carolina offensive line just completely fall apart to the point where they could not protect Spencer Rattler in the pass game. They could not create holes in the run game. And like you mentioned, this was against the North Carolina front that is not exactly highly regarded. It makes you wonder what South Carolina can do in the SEC this season with the fronts that they're going to be facing this year, Georgia's included, if they don't mend something up real quick. And I don't know what answers they have there. I really am almost speechless based on what we saw from the protection. It really made no sense, but they've got a weakness that if they can't fix, they're going to have to throw out a number of plays from their offensive playbook because they know they won't be able to run them successfully. It's one of those things where you're like, I think we're just running West Coast offense and only short passes, and we don't need a deep threat anymore because we're never going to have time to get the ball down the field. It almost feels that way. And again, it is 1 week. Let's try and keep that in mind. I'm going to remind people, let's try not to overreact. Maybe they can shore up that protection. But this to me was less about North Carolina. I still think North Carolina is certainly a good chunk behind what we saw from FSU tonight and where we expect Clemson to be. But South Carolina, if there was any thought of them being in that tier with Kentucky and Tennessee, and let's see who's the second best team in the SEC East is, based on what I saw on Saturday, it's certainly not the Gamecocks.
No, they didn't really look really good. I will say that. I mean, Shane Beamer, the honeymoon period is coming to a close.
Yeah.
And like it's put up or shut up time now, because you can't lose a game like this to your border rival in North Carolina. And yes, I understand that they have a Drake May who was good. He was really good in this game. He wasn't Superman or anything. 269 yards of offense, 2 touchdowns from him. He's a very good player, but he was also playing without his top 2 wideouts in Tez Walker and Nate McCollum, the Georgia Tech transfer. So he didn't look like somebody who was going to dominate this game 31-17. It's South Carolina that just looked bad. This is a team that gave themselves, I think, for all of their shortcomings in general. Look, you rush for 11 yards, you get sacked 9 times. You still have multiple opportunities in the second half where you get inside of the red zone and you don't deliver. You have 1 field goal and you have 2 failed 4th down conversions. That's the football game. That's it. And if you're Shane Beamer, like, you have to expect more from your team. And Shane Beamer said as much after the game. He says, like, hey, look, if we're sliding protection on the offensive line and they're still getting us beat, like if they're still beating us after that, there's an issue. If they and there were times where they were sending 3-man rushes that were making it home, not just knocking Spencer Rattler off his spot. They were getting him on the ground and sending 3-man pressures, and that's just not going to get it done, especially like you mentioned, when Georgia is playing them in 2 weeks. You have to go into Athens. And if you struggled that much with the North Carolina front 7, bless your heart, because Georgia's going to run roughshod over you. So I think you mentioned, I am a little concerned about what South Carolina can be, because I think Spencer Rattler played an altogether pretty good game. And he has a number one receiver in Xavier Legette, excuse me.
That guy
had 9 catches for 178 yards. He's a dude.
That guy looked real. That guy
looked really good.
Yeah.
So, but the thing is, if you cannot give him an opportunity to make passes from the pocket, South Carolina is not going to have a shot. And there's no chance that they're going to be able to recreate what they did against Tennessee. And they're going to fall behind. And look, Shane Beamer's got a lot of questions that he has to get answered here in the near future.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, they're playing a Furman team next week that's not terrible. And I'm not suggesting that they're going to lose, but it's also not a situation where you can really figure a ton of stuff out necessarily. I mean, you may have to play your ones, and you may have to be in a battle and get creative with your playbook. I don't think you're just again, not to pick on whoever Oregon beat, but I don't think you're dropping 60, 70, 80 points on Furman and figuring stuff out. You may be in a little bit of a battle. So this is not like a ramp-up game to where you figure out what does and doesn't work on the line. This is going to be a real rough stretch for the Gamecocks. And look, this was always possible. At least in my mind, I always felt like what we saw last year, and we talked about it, what we saw at the end of the season last year, the win over Clemson and all that stuff, the win over Tennessee by 20-something points. I just didn't feel like that was the real South Carolina team. Now, I don't think this is the real – they're not going to give up 9 sacks every week. It's somewhere in the middle. But this was a big step back to start their season in terms of trying to carry that momentum of how they finished out last year.
Yeah, and I'm not gonna bury South Carolina completely yet, because Spencer Rattler, all things considered, had a very good game. He had 353 yards passing, and he didn't get a touchdown. But look, at the end of the day, it's like I still think that this is a team that can put it all together if the offensive line can figure out some things. Which a lot of it, what it is just figuring it out and building some continuity and some cohesion on the front. And they could still make some good things happen. And I think this is still an 8-win team to me. That's kind of all they were. I think if they had come out and if you would flip these scores, then I would be probably thinking they're a 9 or a 10-win team, maybe a perfect year. But they were never. I still never had them as a team that was going to be going on the road and beating Tennessee or going on the road and beating Georgia. Like I still think that they're a notch below those two teams. But they showed yesterday that, look, maybe they're a little bit further behind than even we thought. And the biggest thing, they only had 2 opportunities of 3rd and 5 or closer. So that's my number one thing. When Furman comes to town next week, got to stay ahead of the chains. You got to be a little bit more effective with that. All right, Abe, let's get to our week 1 takeaways. I'll take it. I'll take this one first. My biggest thought, the new rule change where they stopping the clock when they go out of bounds or they get a first down. Making these games a lot faster. These games are a lot faster, but not in actuality, just the game on the field, because we still got all these commercials and everything else. The running clocks took away 40 to 60 total snaps away from each game. That's really what we potentially saw in this one. There are some teams who didn't hit 50 total snaps of offense, which is an insane number to me. And maybe this is just a week 1 thing. Maybe teams are going to adjust and change, and maybe not. But I'm not super thrilled with the idea that college football is turning into a made-for-TV product. And we'll see what ends up happening with it the rest of the season. But it was a shame, because less football is not a good thing, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm going to disagree with you to an extent. I felt it was relatively seamless, and I didn't notice it, which is kind of the way I was hoping it would go. I didn't feel like teams were being shortchanged plays, or that they didn't have a chance to make larger scale comebacks or anything like that. So I guess I just didn't feel like it impacted the actual flow of the game or how
it did a little bit in that FSU LSU game. It changes the way that they attack in that second half, in that fourth quarter, especially when, look, they have a chance to go down the field and they're trying to drive, but then you're in 2-minute drill with 5 minutes to go, 6 minutes to go. because you don't have the clock stoppages.
Well, but because you gave up 31 straight.
That's also
helps.
Going
right back to that.
They did it to themselves. It changes the way that you attack on offense. And
maybe
I
didn't feel that because I felt, going back to the Carolina, South Carolina, North Carolina game, I felt like every time I was looking at that game, South Carolina was down 14 points with a chance to break it. Like I felt like for 12 minutes straight in the fourth quarter, they had the ball with a chance to cut it to a 1 touchdown lead. So, I mean, I felt like they had plenty of chances to get back from what originally it was 17 or whatever. And they weren't able to do it. I don't think that was a clock thing. I think they weren't able to convert, and that's how that game played out. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how the adjustments are made and how I feel it impacts further down the season. But I was actually relatively pleased just because I didn't notice it that much. But you may have been watching the games differently than I was from that aspect. I'll tell you what one of my big takeaways was, and look, you had a couple of quarterbacks answer the questions, right? Like Jalen Milroe looked great. Obviously Jordan Travis on Sunday night looked great, and you got the regular cast of characters that look great. A bunch of Michael Penix is floating it out there, and Bo Nix and Caleb Williams, and Quinn Ewers looked okay, not great. But two potential national championship contenders had quarterbacks that have to just ask the question. And one of those is Carson Beck. I think it's fair to ask the question. And again, we're not going to overreact, but he obviously can't play the way he did in week 1 the entire season and expect that this team is still going to be a unanimous number 1. But I think even with Carson Beck being okay, this team can be okay in Georgia. The bigger takeaway for me was Kyle McCord at Ohio State. He was not good enough, and they are not going to beat Michigan, and they are not going to beat Penn State, and they are not going to be in the playoffs if he does not progress quite a bit. And like, that's what I'm going to really be focused on, because I thought for most of like the contenders that we've been discussing, even as deep as Texas, Washington, Penn State, USC, Alabama, Michigan, Georgia and Ohio State came up short at the quarterback position. And that needs to, they need to develop and grow those two schools specifically, for Georgia, if they want to three-peat, or for Ohio State if they want to avoid losing 3 straight to Jim Harbaugh.
Yeah, and I'm going to chalk a lot of that up to just first game
sort
of situations. It's just, it happens and it comes with time.
It does, but it was also the first game for Drew Aller. It was not the first game for Quinn Ewers, but it was the first real game for Jalen Milroe. You saw a couple of other quarterbacks that played up to that level, and it was more disappointing than anything. Again, we're not going to panic. We're not going to overreact. But there's an understanding that those two guys specifically, if they want to win the national championship this year, Georgia and Ohio, those two guys have to be better.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, if Georgia's not going to be running the ball at a high level like they did the first time Mike Bobo was here, then you're going to need to be able to throw the ball effectively. And look, by the end of the game, Carson Beck was fine.
Sure.
Like he ended up with a pretty strong finish. He started slow. And I chalked the first half up as much to nerves as it is anything else, but he settled in and he played it. He finished with a pretty good game. I can't really say that about Kyle McCord. McCord looked a little sloppy, and I know I'm a bit bullish on what McCord can do, just based off of the history of Ryan Day and developing quarterbacks, especially in their first year. We've talked about that a lot on the show. And I think that at the end of the day, I think both guys are going to be the consistent starters for their programs moving forward. And I don't think either have any concern about a potential benching or anything like that. But look, like you said, they got to be a little bit better.
Yeah.
At least come the end of the season when all the chips are on the table. But I do want to finish. I do want one fun little note, because Iowa, did you hear about this? They had their first opening drive touchdown since President Bush was president.
Which
and not
Bush?
George W. Bush, Herbert Walker Bush in 1991. Ooh, and they still didn't hit 25 points.
No, they were close. They were close to that
24 points is what they finished with.
One other quick takeaway from week 1, and again, this is probably an overreaction. We'll see how it plays out the rest of the way. But the transfer portal and what it has allowed teams to do is no longer just for the top teams looking to fill a singular hole or a hole on offense, a hole on defense where you need a top cornerback or a top running back to come in, or you feel like you're just missing. It is going to be used in totally different manners. And we saw that obviously from Deion Sanders at Colorado, but a couple small schools that had upwards of 30, 40, 50 transfers also got some big wins as well this weekend. So we'll see how that continues, but the transfer portal and the impact in turning programs around quickly. And I'm not talking about going from 5-7 to 10-2, but I'm talking about going from 3-9, from 2-10. I mean, when you're really in the dumps to getting to where you're respectable and discussing bowl eligibility and just mass transfers and getting it done that way. And I think you saw the start of that this year, and certainly everyone's going to be following Prime in Colorado and how that transfer portal game impacts them. But it's no longer just Alabama needs a running back, let's go get a running back, or Georgia needs a receiver, let's go get a receiver. No, there's a whole different scale of how the portal's being used that I think showed out pretty strongly in week 1.
You're exactly right. I mean, Louisville and Georgia Tech, the first 7 touchdowns of that game were scored by transfer players.
Yeah, good call.
First 7 touchdowns. So it's a new era of college football indeed. And look, we've got all of this coverage right here on the College Football Game Time, or College Football Game Time on Saturdays, College Football Overtime here on Monday mornings. And next week, of course, we have a lot of big matchups that we're going to want to discuss. Texas is traveling to Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and that is going to be your College Football Game Time game of the week next week as we talk about that. But John Fricke joins us on Saturday morning on College Football Game Time. Texas A&M is also playing Miami, Nebraska, and Colorado, like we talked about. And Ole Miss and Tulane are taking it on for an old school SEC matchup. And that's one that I really hope that we don't push down, because that's going to be a really fun one, and one that I want to talk about because, of course, we had some off-air conversations about Tulane. We'll see what they can do and if they can recreate some of the magic that they had last year. But that's for week 2, and that's it for week 1. For Abe Gordon, my name is Garrett Chapman. This is the College Football Overtime Podcast. I'll see you next week.